Consciousness, where is it? Is it mind? Does it exist within the skull? Where do thoughts come from? The philosopher within me ponders things that may or may not be the trajectory of everyone. Hmm. And irony of ironies, the realm of consciousness, it is something that touches all of us in unique fashion. There are a couple reasons that I'm aiming in this particular direction this week. One of them is that Mercury, a planet that has signification about that process of thinking. And on Friday this week, Friday, Thursday of this week, Mercury will be turning retrograde for the second time this year. Now, the time leading up to a Mercury retrograde cycle, and this lasts until August 11th, 10th, 11th, in that window, is a time to set intentions for how are you going to effectively be able to utilize your thinking capacity, Mercury, in a way that, yeah, it's in Leo, can, with any luck, not go too overtly over that line of overt exuberance, Leo. I say this because Mercury in Leo, it has a tendency to open the language tool and spit things out rather abruptly. And the fact that Uranus has just entered the sign of Mercury, which Mercury has a very strong affinity for, just adds that potential of blurtedness, shall we call it, to this mercurial dance. Leo, ruled by the sun, seeks attention, Mercury in Leo. Can you sense the possibility that what it is that wants to be said, from our individual consciousness, thoughts, is likely to be searching for an audience? But again, where does the information come from? In our consciousness that is inspiring language to communicate. I was going to say communicate with, actually, I think I'm going to leave it at that. Communicate with, because it really has that basic bottom line that whether we attempt to engage in this communication tool in whatever environmental circumstance we find ourselves, it is with, it's a two-way street. That is co with communication. That, as I said, and really look deliberately at consciousness. From everything that I've been able to glean in this investigative process of where consciousness is, I am definitely, and this is not just my opinion, recognizing that consciousness is basically a flow of energy that's everywhere, all the time, doesn't ever stop. And we, as, perhaps antenna or radio signals, are tapping into, if you will, consciousness from time to time to what? To see what's there? Perhaps to ask the universe, what's going on? What's it all about, Alfie? The the dance moves that, you know, just show up, come floating in on these waves of consciousness, and our antenna picks them up. Did it come from somewhere within me? Perhaps yes, but maybe perhaps there's a signal. Actually, my senses, there are a vast variety of signals floating in the realm of consciousness all the time. And our soul aspect, that core being that actually animates us, tunes into that realm of consciousness in any particular moment. And if you're open and willing enough, just the right things are going to show up in that ethereal realm that are meant for us to tune into at that moment. call it synchronicity, if you will. Why do these things happen the way they happen? I didn't plan it that way. Which that kind of reminds me, if I've spent perhaps too much time in the planning department, this is the mental capacity within this skull, trying to get things organized in such fashion that I'm going to do this and that, and then this, and then that, and I'm going to go on this trajectory, and life, consciousness floating around you is saying, are you sure that is where you want to go? Because I'm I'm sensing that there's another level of energy that's trying to get my attention in this moment that is going to send me in a tangential reality that I need to follow. That's tuning into consciousness. Now, one of the magical qualities, shall we call it, of consciousness is that while I can tune into it at whatever moment I want, it's available all the time, not just to me, but to all of us, to all of creation. This opens up some possibilities as to creative ways of engaging, if you will, in group consciousness. Yeah, this wavelength of consciousness, this energy field we find ourselves in all the time. It brings things to us in ways that actually exist beyond a lot of our limited thinking capacities to inspire us. Now, the process of group consciousness coming to focus on a particular wavelength of the all there is of consciousness is a very powerful vehicle that can be utilized in a lot of different ways. There have been multiple uses of the tool of consciousness along these lines forever. This is not something new. It's something that, however, from the Newtonian Cartesian level of scientific physical perspective, is not really, what shall we say? It's not easily accepted from a scientific perspective. That Cartesian Newtonian version of reality is that everything is separate from everything else. Well, consciousness, that place, that energy being that we all find ourselves in all the time, it doesn't easily fit into, you know, that idea of separateness because it's right there. It's available as an energy quotient for any of us to tap into at any time, and we can do it together. And the more focused that our energy is as we do this dance of consciousness stimulation in group focus, we can bring about things on this planet that are beyond what most of us can only imagine. Are you ready for that dance? So, something to keep in mind as this week unfolds and the Mercury retrograde cycle comes. It's always helpful to have a plan before Mercury goes retrograde to investigate, you know, gather some materials together about something you're really interested in, something that is, moving in your world at this time that you can explore, in ways that the focus, because Mercury going retrograde, how we think, it's going back over degrees of the zodiac that it has transpired, transited over before. And so, you know, all this, it stays within the sign of Leo. So you can kind of sense a solar percolation that is potential in what we might, you know, tune into as far as our creative energies, the sun, very creative energy, go, that in a Leonian fashion, you know, we may have, inspired, instigated, initiated something over the past short while, week or two, that, you know, we may sense isn't as clear as we may have wanted it to be. Well, during the Mercury retrograde cycle, when it goes back to, where does it go back to? It goes back to 4 degrees of Leo. And it's time to meditate on appropriate use of our thinking processes, of our communication tool that, is that's asking us to pay attention, do some investigating, get your materials together. This is what Mercury retrogrades are ideal for, is really, not being distracted, if you will, by the machinations of the world. Yes, we can still tap into the level of consciousness to utilize as we explore what it is that it really means to tap into consciousness. You know, I'm, basically offering you this as an opportunity. How is your understanding of consciousness going forward from this moment? Not so much interested in the way it's been, but what do you sense is trying to get your attention in this time, you know? And might you recognize there are others who perhaps, think along similar lines as we do, that at this time could use a reminder that there's a heck of a lot more going on than we may be inclined generally to pay attention to. So I haven't put up a chart for this week yet. And I may not do that. Technically, we're in the season of Cancer right now. So the moon is essentially the focus. And the moon is, how do I feel? What do I sense? And this week, the moon moves from early Pisces all the way down to early Gemini, which means that it's from a astrological perspective, moving through Pisces, the end of some cycle into Aries and Taurus and then Gemini, the beginning, Aries, of something new that's trying to get my attention. And Taurus, how do I understand what is of value to me? Am I tuned in to the resources of Mother Earth? This is essential Taurus. And the moon is asking us to, you know, let go. We're done with a particular cyclic dance part that we've been doing so that something new can open up for us. Feel that energy. There's something percolating here. And it's an invitation to us to really step up to the plate. And, you know, it isn't necessarily the rules all the time that we need to do this alone. No, no, not. We energetically tapped in at this level of consciousness have the capacity of facilitating something brand new to transpire on the planet that has been waiting for us in group consciousness to tune into. The degree that Mercury goes retrograde is 15 degrees of Leo, known as a cross quarter point, which in astrology, all the cross quarter points, which are the middle of every season, are at the 15 degrees of each of the fixed signs: Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, and Aquarius. This 15th degree of Leo, they're powerful points right there in the middle of the season, summertime. We're here in the middle of summer. And so the Sabian symbol, it kind of goes along with this dance talk that I've been ex expounding. The Sabian symbol reads, "The storm ended. All nature rejoices in brilliant sunshine." And the keynote, the surge of life and love after a major crisis. The sequential unfolding of the Sabian symbols in each subsequent degree of the zodiac tell a story. The degree before this, the Sabian symbol reads, "A pageant with its spectacular floats moves along a street crowded with cheering people." Its keynote, the more or less sensational release of energies in a form dramatizing the unconscious aspirations of man's primitive and instinctual nature. Summertime, 4th of July just happened recently. Can you feel that potential? And then the degree after, a volunteer church choir singing religious hymns. The feeling, the keynote, the feeling of togetherness which unites men and women in their dedication to a collective ideal. The sea of consciousness available for any of us to tap into any time. As a matter of fact, we tap into it often and don't even realize where those inspirations come from in those three unfolding symbols around now. There's an invitation, to be more than you ever thought possible in unison with others who are doing exactly the same thing. Now, this 15 degrees of Leo just happens to be the degree where, in my own chart, my Pluto is when I was born, sitting right there. And Pluto it's a transformative energy. There's, uh, there's I'm going to say there's a driven force to it to inspire a an awakening to some new kind of potential that is going to require the release, the letting go of what got me to where I am, so that something magnificent has the space to be born new. Something must pass away for that space to be available. Anyway, I think that I'm not even going to look at a chart this week. It's this is the energy that I sense is possible. If we can find something that fits into the stillness, like this band behind me on a flat, glass smooth sea heading out, making himself available to let his thoughts roam along the levels of consciousness and just float, keeping his senses aware to what is next. What is next? Can we settle into that same level of stillness where clarity of consciousness allows us to attune to one another? That is the invitation that this week I bring to you. So that's it. Ciao. I will be back next week.